Well, good morning to those of you who are joining us live or who are watching or listening to the recording of today's presentation. We are on the third of four sessions for the Spring 2024 Aging with Grace series. My name is Seth Stander, and I am the Community Aging Specialist for HHCI CARES, which is a part of the Healing Center and Institute. HHCI CARES, the CARES is an acronym for Caregiving, Aging, Resilience, Ethics, and Spirituality. And CARES is directed by Dr. Peggy Dettermeyer. As I mentioned, today, February 19th, 2024, happy President's Day to all. Our morning session is going to cover understanding living options. And we have one more week of Aging with Grace in which we will go ahead and cover paying for aging. Previous sessions included legal aspects related to aging and healthcare rights and responsibilities. Any of you who are registered for one or more of these four sessions will receive links to the YouTube recordings of each session, as well as the slide deck for each session. And so we certainly are glad to offer these to you thanks to generous underwriting and a robust philanthropic department at the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. We are happy to offer these to you free of charge. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. We've got a lot of material to pack into this roughly hour and a quarter or so. And so we'll start with the idea of living options as we age. It can become more complicated, especially if physical and or mental challenges arise. So the question becomes, and it is a question which I hope in the previous sessions you recognize the desire we have to encourage proactivity rather than reacting to life's imbalances as injury, illness befall us. What can we do right now to talk about the quality of life we wish to see maximized, both in the present as well as in the future? So, what we're going to do today is we're going to cover some of the better known options that are available in our various communities. We're also going to encourage you to go to hhci.org and to click on that resources tab that I've mentioned in previous sessions. There are going to be, as you scroll back in reverse chronological order, there's going to be different sessions in that recording collection that include presentations on relocating, downsizing, and more. And we certainly here, Peggy and I can serve as either individual consultants directly or as resource assistants indirectly if you find yourself facing a situation where you are considering relocation and you're considering downsizing as part of the natural course, that relocation process. So the list of items that is up here on this slide includes, of course, aging in place at home or a home that in terms of family life, a multi-generational home, perhaps one where you have a separate wing that is devoted to the individual who is aging in place, while other generations of family live on that property, or it could be a separate unit on that property itself with easy access to the main home. Independent living options are a little bit different than the model I just described, as they typically take place under the auspices of a public agency, not-for-profit or for-profit organization. There is adult daycare as a supplement to aging in place, and if it proves necessary, to the independent living option, although we're going to talk a little bit more about how, if you've reached the point where that is useful to you, you may need to go ahead and consider supplements at wherever you call home, including the possibility of relocating to an assisted living facility, especially one if there are cognitive issues in play that has a memory care unit or is a standalone memory care facility licensed also as an assisted living facility. Personal care home models are included under this umbrella of assisted living facilities. We're going to talk a little bit more today about what constitutes a licensed versus unlicensed personal care home and why that matters. And then ultimately, nursing facilities are going to be the most intense form of aging care, depending on our physical and or cognitive situations that we or loved ones are experiencing. Now, I haven't intentionally skipped over the notion of home care or home health care. We're going to discuss that as well. But that is primarily, as the adult daycare piece, a supplement to aging in place or to the independent living side. Although there are occasions in which, under the assisted living facility or even the nursing facility, there may be some parts or elements, especially of home health care, specifically the rehabilitation parts of those services. If the facility doesn't maintain them themselves, going ahead and getting a prescription to have those brought to your residence, which would be the facility, is certainly an option that we can discuss later on. Now, in terms of preference, 80% plus of folks easily, I'm being very conservative in my estimate here, would prefer, assuming it's a healthy, safe, feasible option, to remain in their own homes. Again, however that has been defined in that individual and family's lives, whether it is their own four walls, whether it is part of a larger home that is their independent space. Our loved ones want to remain in familiar environments. Having said that, we need to go ahead and consider, and I mentioned feasibility, that goes to pragmatic concerns regarding finances as much as it goes to health and safety. But for the moment, we're going to focus in this session on health and safety and introduce you, if you are not already familiar with how activities of daily living, or ADLs, are defined, what they are, and why they matter. So, this is actually a more exhaustive list that I've created, and within it are the traditional activities of daily living, embedded, if you will, in these categories. And they include dressing, bathing, meal preparation, eating, ambulating or simply walking, transferring, toileting, being able to handle one's own hygienic needs, navigating stairs, and engaging in appropriate safety and emergency responses. Now, that we could spend the entire session going into greater detail about each one of these and how they are best accomplished in a safe and healthy way. And if assistance is needed, what is the most feasible form of assistance that you might need? We are going to touch on some of that today, but I think it's important to know the category, just as we talked in the healthcare rights and responsibilities section of Aging with Grace, as we talked in the legal section of Aging with Grace about wills, trusts, the probate process. I think your literacy needs to be either created or reinforced when it comes to speaking, especially with outside assistance or potential outside assistance, the language they will speak. And ADLs are an essential common language for healthcare providers for those who are aging, whether in place with assistance or in some other type of long-term care facility, licensed or unlicensed. We address this problem of living, and I know problem is potentially a value laden word, but what we're really talking about here is addressing a problem proactively, and therefore the problem itself is not a negative. It is simply another part of life in which inevitably through the natural aging process we find ourselves naturally adjusting to changes in our bodies, in our motor skills, in our cognitive fitness, and making sure that we are prepared for degrading scenarios all the way to worst case scenarios when it comes to maintaining as much autonomy and dignity as possible as we consider the latter stages of life. So part of that is, of course, coming to programs like these. So we're glad that you have joined us again live or by watching the recording of today's program, and we hope that no matter what is shared here, you are already engaged in an exploration of your various living options and are seeking further information or reinforcement of what you've already researched to determine with your family members what the best fit is going to be for you in the short term and, yes, in the long term. And then ultimately implementing it in such a way that allows you pragmatically to not only afford the experience, but to experience as high a quality of life as possible while doing so. So, from the least to the most restrictive, let's begin with independent living options. For people who are mostly or fully independent, that essentially means, by the way, that list of ADLs that I had a couple of slides earlier, that you should be able to complete any of them without difficulty. For those of you who fall into that category and simply don't want to maintain perhaps a house that is outsized for your current needs, or you have decided not to move in with family or to remain with family if you had already chosen to live on the same grounds as other generations of family members, you may be looking for a senior apartment or a space in a senior or retirement community, what is often referred to Del Webb style as a retirement home or an active senior community. And you're going to find, of course, that the costs for these are going to vary widely by the size and type of home that you're looking at and the community amenities that come with that monthly note, whether it is a rental note or whether it is a mortgage note. Again, the expectation here is that anyone in these communities is functioning at a high level physically and cognitively. So some types of settings that I've mentioned under the umbrella of independent living. The senior apartment communities generally will accept people starting at the age of 55 and above who can demonstrate independence and self-reliance. You may only need a few basic services. You may prefer, just with traffic in your community, to have transportation services that senior community may offer, basic housekeeping services, trash pickup services. In other words, things that you might do from your own privately owned home, if you are moving from home ownership to senior apartment rental. Now, these are going to vary widely in price based on geography, amenities, and more, but plan on at least $1,200 a month and above for a studio or a one-bedroom apartment in such senior apartment communities. These can be subsidized with low or sliding scale rent available based on your financial need. And it can be an option in terms of balancing your desire for autonomy with the need for, call it the most fundamental form of community, assuming again that you may already have other community supports in place whether they are faith-based, secular, family, you name it, that already provides you with meaning in your day-to-day or week-to-week life. Here's a good place to go ahead and introduce you to, if you don't already know of them, your county's Area Agency on Aging. They're one of three different types of taxpayer funded institutions that exist in every county and territory in the United States. The AAA, that's not the Automobile Association of America when it comes to the older adult world of healthcare and policy. It is the Area Agency on Aging, although it may have its own unique name in the county or territory you find it within. There are also in each county or territory in the United States, and they very often work very closely with these area agencies on aging, Aging and Disability Resource Centers, or ADRCs for short. Finally, long-term care ombudsman programs, which are designed to serve with the consent of residents or their proxies as individual and or system advocates for people who reside in licensed assisted living or nursing facilities. This is, again, a hidden often we don't consider in its threefold configuration, because as I mentioned before, like the ADRC and the AAA working closely together, long-term care ombudsman programs work closely with each of those other agencies as well. So that triangle of services or three-tiered layer of services, whatever image works best for you, is often something that citizens are unaware of until the need arises. We're going to have in the slide deck, we're going to have links to at least Harris County's AAA. We're based here in Houston, which is a part of Harris County. And there will also be listings in there for the ADRC, which is known as Care Connection in Harris County, and Harris County's Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. If you reside outside of Harris County, finding the counterparts in the counties where you are served is pretty straightforward. And you can always start with the links that we have put into these slide decks and go from there by contacting those agencies, or again, reaching out to Peggy or to me, and we'll help look them up for you. And our contact information is going to be in the slide deck as well. A variation on the senior apartment model are the retirement communities or senior living communities model. It's going to look a little a little bit similar to the senior apartment setting, although it is going to be beefed up considerably thanks to, and again, you're paying for this service, a broad range of various intellectual, physical, and social activities. It's going to include transportation services. It's going to include housekeeping, trash pickup, and so forth. It may also include meal options, depending on what communal dining exists in such a community for social purposes primarily, because each apartment should come with some type of kitchen facility for those who continue to find joy in preparing their own meals, and the freedom to do so at any time within the confines of your own personal dwelling. Other amenities are going to vary greatly depending on the size and scope of these communities. As a result, they're going to vary in terms of price based on the locations and amenities. I think $27.50 a month and above for a studio or one bedroom residence in these communities. And I say residence because it could be an apartment in a tower type of setting, or it could be a bungalow, if you will, in standalone community dwellings that are part of a retirement community. I mentioned the Del Webb model as an example. Now, those are hardly bungalows in the sense that they are usually 2, 3 bedroom and above homes that reside on a property that is geared for residents age 55 and up. And they have clubhouses, they have usually outdoor tracks, there may be a golf course attached to those communities. Obviously, the price for those amenities and everything else I've mentioned is going to be commensurate with the location and the amenities offered. There are options in lower priced senior living and retirement communities to utilize housing choice vouchers, and especially in government owned senior living and retirement communities, of which there are still a few. The Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, HUD's rental assistance programs may be available. This is where you would absolutely want to talk to your area agency on aging when it comes to both the public and private options in terms of HUD subsidy or housing choice vouchers. Now, regardless of the type of independent setting, aging in place in some type of a independent living community along the lines of what I've just mentioned, there may reach a point, short-term or ongoing, for supplementing your quality of life through getting outside home care assistance or home health care assistance. And the primary reason why this is in today's presentation is to go ahead and remind you of the difference in terms of services offered and how financially it's covered. Home care agencies are going to provide aides who primarily focus on meal preparation, on housekeeping, on transportation needs, and you can absolutely go ahead and hire them directly if you wish to. These are non-healthcare workers who are going to go ahead and help you with those elements of your daily care. But the assumption there is that when it comes to other activities of daily living, such as transferring from, say, bed to floor, ambulating, taking care of your personal hygiene and all that that entails, you're comfortable doing that on your own in a safe and healthy way. If you go through an agency, which allows you not only to specify a regular rotation of home aides, but also to provide substitutes should those home aides move on or otherwise be unavailable on their scheduled dates, you can expect to pay a slight premium for that. Roughly $23 an hour and above is the average in this part of the country for working through a home aid agency. You can always save a little money by going ahead and hiring someone directly. And if you're able to find someone to do what you trust them to do for $15 an hour or more, that is terrific. I suspect the number will be higher, but we wanted to keep this as a base because it does seem to be within the lower end of the range for direct hire of home aides. Having said that, you're also going to be responsible for setting up your own substitutes when a home aide is unavailable and you're not going through an agency, of course. Now let's pivot over to home health care. Home health care is often a short-term option prescribed by a physician after, say, a scheduled or an unscheduled hospital stay, where you are in need of short-term care in terms of rehabilitation services, physical, occupational, speech. You may need help in terms of obtaining and administering post-hospitalization medication. You may need assistance with regards to specialty care such as wound care. If you were to pay for that out of pocket, you're looking at roughly $3,500 a month based on a 40-hour week of receiving such services. These are not 24/7 operations. You would schedule the number of days per week in which you would have the various individuals that comprise the interdisciplinary team from that home healthcare agency nurses, therapists, social workers, and so forth, coming in to meet your physical, logistical, psychosocial needs. This is where ultimately you want your medical coverage, whether it is through Medicare, whether it is private, or a combination of both, to kick in and to minimize your out of pocket cost when it comes to home health care, especially if you require what is known as DME, durable medical equipment, which could be as minimal as a bedside commode or perhaps a physical therapy step or mats for when you are engaging in such therapy, all the way to an electric bed that assists you with elevation of the body and more, perhaps turning and so forth to avoid bed sores. All of this would be covered if it is prescribed by your physician under your Medicare, under your private coverage. Again, your mileage may vary in terms of out of pocket costs, but it is certainly worth inquiring as to what the expected costs, if any, out of pocket can be. And transparency in pricing, thankfully, is now something which is being put into place due to federal regulation. Another supplement to the at home slash independent living type of situation, although in the latter case, if you find yourself needing this, you may reach the point where your needs will be more from a cognitive perspective, especially than what an independent living setting may permit. And so you may be finding yourself in need of researching higher levels of care at some point. So it serves a valuable purpose, but I want you to be aware that if you are aging in place at home, in the home that you share with family, or in an independent living setting, the use of adult daycare absolutely necessary if you are experiencing, especially the beginning stages or even moderate stages of dementia or other cognitive decline. But ultimately, it's also a time to be proactive about looking to how to keep your quality of life and your safety as high as possible by determining the best setting for you as your condition progresses. That's the proactivity part of all of this, where we encourage conversations on every level when it comes to everything from medical choices that you would want based on certain situations to how you want to prepare for ultimately your assets to be utilized for your needs and the needs of your beneficiaries and heirs after your demise, and certainly the setting in which you receive, when needed, essential forms of care. In the greater Houston area, the amazing place, Care Partners Dementia Day Center, are going to work with you, or if you are the loved one of someone who is experiencing early to mid stage dementia, with them. And of course, the more often you go, the greater the likelihood that they're going to have a lower daily rate. $75 and above per day is about average in the United States for multi-day programming costs that are incurred and therefore passed along to consumers who utilize such services as, again, in our area, the Amazing Place and Care Partners Dementia Daycare. We talked about the possibility of graduating to a higher level of care where ultimately you require some assistance with some activities of daily living, some ADLs. And to a certain limit, assisted living facilities can be a terrific fit for this. A reminder first of those ADLs: dressing, bathing, meal preparation, eating, transferring, toileting, hygiene, stair navigation, safety, and emergency responses. So, as I said, assisted living facilities, in addition to, of course, providing housing, are going to provide care and board for seniors who require some assistance with these daily tasks. And this part is important without the need for skilled care. The best example I can think of this is the one of transfers. If you, due to a diminishing gait, diminishing strength and endurance, require the assistance of someone to safely transfer from your bed to a cane or a walker or even a wheelchair, and a transfer from those to, say, a dining room chair or a shower chair, as just examples of a few different ways in which transfer occurs throughout the day. We don't tend to think about it that way until it becomes something that is a safety issue, not just something we take for granted. If one person can safely assist you in that transfer, then assisted living facilities are appropriate. But assisted living facility regulations state that if you need 2 or more people to assist in said transfers, ultimately, assisted living facilities cannot accomplish that, at least on their own. One option might be to go ahead and to have a rotation of 24/7 caregiving staff to supplement the assisted living facility staff so that a second person who you or your loved ones have privately hired can be there to be that second person to assist with a transfer. I know some of you may be thinking at this point, well, what if we just do a rotation of family members? Unless you are trained at the level of a certified nursing assistant or higher, that's not going to work because there are liability issues that the assisted living facility may face if unskilled assistance is provided for what really should be a skilled performed task. So it is potentially a great model unless you go beyond what regulations say assisted living facility staff are allowed to do, and you go past the feasibility of, say, affording private staff in the case of, say, using a second skilled individual to assist with transfers. But let's think about it. If you need assistance with transfers, you're also likely going to need assistance with dressing and bathing, with meal preparation, possibly eating and swallowing. Walking is going to be an issue, and toileting and other hygiene are going to be an issue, let alone a safety or emergency response. And I'm not going to say a thing about navigating stairs. So it's great in terms of what it offers. You can see on the rest of this slide, roughly $4,000 a month is the floor for decent assisted living care facilities. And I use the term decent because every long-term care facility could benefit from hiring additional staff for daily support of residents. There will be, in many cases, additional fees tied to whatever additional assistance from a regulatory standpoint the assisted living facility is allowed to provide. And that includes a lot of what I just mentioned, by the way. You may find an assisted living facility that, if necessary, will cover as part of your flat rate many of the ADLs or assistance with those ADLs that I just mentioned, or they may charge a la carte for assistance with those. But they're more likely to go ahead and handle laundry, trash, room cleaning, transportation, certainly your meals, etc. Getting you to and from different medical appointments, shopping, in-house and off-campus social activities, all of that may be covered in a base cost as well. Or again, there may be a la carte costs that are factored in, especially if it's tickets to outside venues for shows and other activities. This is where long-term care ombudsmen are going to be an incredible resource. Every long-term care facility is assigned a long-term care ombudsman to visit at least quarterly, depending on the size of the facility, that is to say, its bed capacity. And ultimately, they may visit not just on demand, but their routine visits may exceed quarterly frequencies based on that size or capacity, bed capacity. And there may be other reasons, such as transitions in administration, direct care staff, um, recent long-term care regulatory visitation, which is a task that is accomplished by, in the state of Texas, the HHSC, Health and Human Services Commission. Um, you 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 find yourself, usually as a long-term care facility, getting more attention by long-term care ombudsman when long-term care regulatory services, that's the investigators of abuse, neglect, exploitation allegations in a long-term care facility, come from the Health and Human Services Commission to investigate. And the same applies as we look at nursing facilities. And you'll notice I put the word skilled in parentheses, and this is a terminology issue. Nursing homes, skilled nursing facilities, and a myriad, it seems, of other names that are used to go ahead and to describe the highest level of usually long-term care for someone. Although, again, nursing facilities may have skilled services available, like rehabilitation hospitals may have skilled services available, inpatient rehab facilities or IRFs, or long-term acute care hospitals known as LTACs may have. If you need a short-term rehabilitative stay before returning to whatever your long-term residence is, again, independent living or your own private home where otherwise you're aging in place. I will say this. Nursing facilities are designed to provide the type of medical and therapeutic care that can only be safely and effectively performed by or under the supervision of top tier professionals or technical personnel. I know you're going to say, hey, didn't you just read that bullet point? It's important to hear it out loud. That's the ideal of a nursing facility, be it for a short-term stay, a la, I'm choosing to use the rehabilitation services as one example that exist within a nursing facility, as opposed to going to an inpatient rehab facility or a long-term acute care hospital to continue my recovery after, say, a hip replacement, or working on rehabbing my ankle after I've had a break or a severe sprain, followed by a hospital stay, or wound care, or I need antibiotic therapy administered through an IV shunt for a period of perhaps weeks. And it's safer to do it under the umbrella of one of these types of facilities. As a community aging specialist for the Hope and Healing Center and Institute, and prior to that as a staff ombudsman for Harris County's long-term care ombudsman program, let me simply say this. Wherever you find yourself in the state of Texas or elsewhere in the United States, if it is humanly possible for you after a hospital stay to arrange to be discharged to an inpatient rehabilitation facility or to a long-term acute care hospital for whatever the post-hospitalization services are that you require to fully recover from your scheduled or unscheduled stay, pick the inpatient rehab facility, pick the long-term acute care hospital. And here's why. The skilled personnel in a nursing facility may be excellent. You may have some incredibly dedicated and talented physical and occupational and speech therapists, wound care nurses, medication technicians capable of administering IV antibiotic therapy, and more. But it's not going to do you, especially the rehabilitation part, that much good if the other nursing facility staff, primarily the certified nursing aides, the med techs for oral medication, and more, are not properly staffed enough so that you can be roused from bed, you can bathe, get changed for the day, have something to eat, and make the time slot for the rehabilitation service, just to use that as a common example. Whereas in an inpatient rehab facility or in a long-term acute care hospital, that's what they're dedicated to doing, because everyone is there, by definition, under a short-term stay. As opposed to the other parts of the nursing facility, which are for long-term residents. And the CNAs, the med techs, housekeeping, laundry, all of the above, they serve both populations. And if they're stretched thin, it doesn't matter if you're there short-term or long-term, you're going to be underserved, especially if your goal is to leave there and go home. Please consider an LTAC or an IRF. Hospital staff, usually social workers under the umbrella often of what's called case management, may be putting pressure on you or your loved ones to have you place in a nursing facility because their skilled section has plenty of open beds. There's a reason why nursing facilities nowadays, especially post-pandemic, have plenty of bed space. It's because more transparency in how they operate and what their deficiencies are as imperfect, but hopefully evolving institutions. The transparency has increased exponentially since the horrors of treatment for people throughout the COVID period prior to vaccinations being available. So, yeah, it would make the social worker's job a lot easier if you simply agreed to go to the skilled section of a nursing facility. Insist that all options be looked at. Here's the other reason. Medicare is going to cover, at least for the first 20 days, 100% of that stay. After that, depending on your financial needs and more, which is a whole other issue in terms of payment, which we'll cover in the paying for aging section, they're going to cover it at least 80% with you having a daily out-of-pocket deductible. If you need more than 20 days medically speaking for your rehabilitation or what other forms of short-term care you need before you can truly return home and continue towards, God willing, a full recovery. So please, please, please consider those options. If inpatient rehab facilities and LTACs are not available, you, before you go ahead and discharge, would be well served to contact your long-term care ombudsman's office and to have them be your eyes and ears, since they regularly visit all licensed long-term care facilities, and that includes facilities with skilled sections for short-term care, to tell you more about how well staffed they are and how likely it is that you'll experience an uncomplicated recovery. End of stump speech. This slide is simply a reminder to you that if part of what brings you into the long-term care world is primarily due to cognitive decline as opposed to physical decline, although of course both are possible, Memory care units in larger facilities, be they assisted living, sometimes in nursing facilities, is going to be a way to make sure that, especially within that secure unit or secure facility, your loved one is safe. They're surrounded by specially trained staff, which, again, you get what you pay for, which is why you can see the cost down here for having staff working on a care plan that's specifically targeted to a resident's cognitive decline and commensurate needs is going to be quite a bit higher, roughly $5,500 a month base. And then from there, if necessary, add-ons depending on the extra types of services or assistance with activities of daily living that that person may require. Having said all of that, it doesn't matter how good a memory care facility, if it's an assisted living facility or a unit within an assisted living facility or a nursing facility looks. What matters is whether or not they treat the training and continuing education of their staff seriously, let alone maintaining a good staff to resident ratio. So, in addition to looking for, and you can certainly get your long-term care ombudsman to assist you with this, in addition to looking for the standard licensing for these types of units or facilities as either assisted living or nursing facility capable, you also want to look for whether they have been licensed by your state as a certified Alzheimer's / dementia facility or unit within a larger facility. That is going to be, for better or worse, the baseline by which you should judge whether or not this place knows how to adjust their day-to-day approach to you or your loved one as your or their cognitive decline evolves. Something to keep in mind. And we'll talk for a moment about the personal care home model. Now, in order for a personal care home model, that is to say, a facility that's basically within a converted private home that provides everything that you might expect an assisted living facility to provide in terms of shelter, meals, supervision, assistance with activities of daily living. At least 2 or more, again, is the minimum requirement for you qualifying for such care. In order for these facilities to be licensed, they have to have the capacity for at least 4 residents. 4 or more residents equals they get the opportunity to be licensed as assisted living facilities using a personal home care model and setting by Texas Health and Human Services. Now, why would you consider that as opposed to a larger big box community model? Well, you or your loved one's personality, whether you are a natural introvert, extrovert, or someplace in between, may come in mind. Also, depending on your ability to pay out of pocket, because here's the bad news about all assisted living facilities in Texas. You don't get to pay for those with Medicaid dollars. Medicare dollars will cover short-term stays in appropriately licensed facilities for skilled short-term care, which we've already covered in detail. But in terms of just room and board and long-term stays, assisted living facilities, including a personal care home model, are out-of-pocket payment, private payment. If you happen to have long-term care insurance, which we'll cover in brief in our last section on paying for aging, terrific. That's still private pay because you're paying the premium for an insurance company to go ahead and to dole out a certain daily amount, after which you may have no financial obligation or a modest financial obligation if the daily cost of staying in that facility meets or exceeds, respectively, what your long-term care insurance may provide. Medicaid is something that is both financially and medically reviewed for eligibility. And you need to have, in both cases, you need to have acute medical need and be running on financial fumes in order to allow Medicaid to go ahead and to cover the cost of a long-term care facility stay. The only model that consistently takes Medicaid when coupled with an individual's what's called applied monthly income, which is typically their Social Security, possibly an additional pension payment, and so forth. When you take out a tiny amount for a personal needs allowance, all of that goes to the facility to cover your room, board, and everything else that you might need in terms of basic care. Now, if you don't want to go that route and you want to go ahead and pay out of pocket and you want to pay on the lower end of the average cost range for an assisted living facility, as you can see, the personal care home model, I've put a number here as low as $1,500 a month. Those are going to be primarily 3 beds or less. In other words, unlicensed personal care homes. There may be nothing wrong with doing so, but what you don't get are the services of long-term care ombudsman, because unlicensed facilities are outside their mandate. You would need to work with adult protective services and consider the relationship essentially like a landlord-tenant relationship in terms of protections offered to you. So keep that in mind, and buyer beware. It could work out great, but if there is a clash of personalities in the house, especially between the owner-operator and you or your loved one who resides there, they can simply evict you. And you might try to go ahead and take the legal route to prevent that from happening, but that's about the only protection you have. So you get what you pay for. And the licensing element of assisted living facilities includes not just resident rights, but modest protections when it comes to involuntary discharge. When you get nursing facilities, your rights, including your right to be free from an improper involuntary discharge, are incredibly more robust. But under an unlicensed model, financially, it may make sense in the short term. Be prepared to have a plan B should personalities clash. I've mentioned quite a bit of this already in terms of how to consider the right facility. A lot of this is going to make pragmatic sense to you already if you haven't already done it. So consider it reinforcement for many of you who are watching or listening to what I'm sharing live or in recording. I think it's important, of course, after you've evaluated your needs, to talk to friends who have been in the same situation, at least as similar as such situations can be, because every individual is unique and their needs are unique, but there are trends. Websites for facilities may be very upfront in terms of what they do and don't offer. Online reviews of those facilities, whether it's private reviews or through Medicare's Nursing Home Compare, great opportunities for you to go ahead and to get some basic data as a snapshot in time, which, by the way, is also what happens when you make a visit. I suggest a scheduled visit first so that you can have a tour of the facility, and then make an unscheduled visit. There should be no reason why you shouldn't be permitted to wander the facility without invading any resident's privacy, of course, in order to determine on an unscheduled visit whether what you saw during the scheduled visit is consistent with what you're seeing that day when you just show up. And when you do, I recommend that you use all of your senses, especially sight and smell. And here I'm not just talking about how tidy and clean a place looks and smells. I'm also talking about, does the laundry smell fresh? Do the sheets smell fresh if you are invited into a person's room? Does the food smell like food you'd want to eat? These are, you can even go ahead and arrange with your loved one, or if you are the person considering it, to arrange, even if there's a modest cost, to have a meal and talk to people about their experiences if they're willing to do so. Also, read what's called their survey book. All licensed long-term care facilities are required to keep records of routine surveys, which also includes not just annual surveys on the following of the rules and regulations under which that facility is licensed to operate, but also its records of investigations for allegations of abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, and the resolution of the investigations. It should be in there as well. Now, do they have to leave it right out in the middle of their front lobby? No, but many do. What they do have to do is make it accessible to you if you can't see it readily in plain sight, and go to a staff member and ask for it to be brought to you for consideration. If there's ever a reluctance to do that, by all means, contact a long-term care ombudsman, because that's a requirement. And you may want to even tour with a long-term care ombudsman the facility, and maybe schedule at a time when they are making a routine visit, or have another reason to be there to attend to the needs of another resident, to attend a resident council meeting, a family council meeting, etc. This is also a good place to go ahead and to remind everybody that it's important when you're doing your research to find out whether the ownership of the facility, especially nursing facilities, but this does apply to certain types of assisted living facilities, whether or not it is privately owned, whether it is owned by a non or not-for-profit institution, or whether it is owned by a for-profit corporation, especially if the corporation that owns it is what's known as a private equity company. Because very often that company will also own a lot of the related services that that long-term care facility uses. Durable medical equipment rental, home health care services, hospice services, management fees, leasing fees, the physical, occupational, and speech therapies, the wound care that might be involved. Remember, I talked about short-term stays for the skilled side of nursing facilities and so forth. What happens here is that when you have the same entity that owns all of these related party or institutions is doing business, what's called a related party transaction, look that up, with the nursing facility, very often the payment for those services by the nursing facility to those specialized services that help maintain the various parts of operations for the facility is going to be such that the private equity company that owns the entire enterprise and its component parts makes money every year, but the nursing facility, at least on paper, operates at a loss. And then says, when long-term care ombudsman or regulatory services from, say, Texas Health and Human Services Commission come to investigate issues regarding staffing ratios, because there are some bare minimum staffing ratios in Texas. The bar is set very low, and it's a little bit of a Wild West experience out there when it comes to best practices. In the end, the facility ownership is going to instruct the administration of the nursing facility to cry poverty. We're operating at a loss. We're not fully, our census isn't full. And we can only hire based on how much we actually bring in. Related party transactions are very often the vehicle, and it is a legal vehicle, at least for now, that is used to make sure that nursing facilities owned by private equity companies operate at a functional loss. They get a tax benefit for that too, as for-profit businesses. So, regardless of what friends have said, websites have said, online reviews have said about the place's strengths and challenges, knowing who owns a facility matters. Because if it is a person for whom it's a labor of love, and they have opened a small nursing facility or a small, even a personal care home model of assisted living facility, you might well be served better by the person who is a true believer in the mission of providing you or your loved ones at the latter stages of life with autonomy and dignity and safety and more. And staffing is the proof of that mission being fulfilled. The last few slides that are contained in this deck are if you find yourself in a long-term care facility, or if you find yourself in a non-licensed facility. I have a third bullet point, which is listed here, that has the Texas Abuse Hotline. The formal name for Adult Protective Services in Texas is the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Having said that, everyone says APS. The first two bullet points are for those of you who are in or have loved ones in long-term care facilities and you have concerns, reaching out to the long-term care ombudsman program and making a complaint to Texas Health and Human Services so that their long-term care regulatory providers can go out and investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. Regardless of the setting you or your loved one is in, licensed or unlicensed, I've also put a bullet point here for how to contact your, or more to the point, the facilities geographically assigned state and federal elected officials. And the reason for this is because I consider it best practice as either your own best advocate or as an advocate for a loved one who's facing problems in a long-term care setting, licensed or unlicensed, when you have contacted the appropriate agency and gotten an intake number, contact one or more of your elected officials. Their staff is there to assist in such an investigative process by asking the appropriate agency, the long-term care ombudsman program or the long-term care regulatory arm of Texas Health and Human Services or APS, to expedite the matter through what is termed a legislative inquiry. Another great term right along with related party transactions. Legislative inquiry with an intake number is going to help you get you or your loved one's concerns to the top of the line when it comes to getting investigated by the appropriate agency, receiving support from the appropriate agency. And you'll find on the slide that follows the type of information that you're going to want to include, not just in the initial contact with, say, an ombudsman, long-term care regulator, or staff at APS, and then later with the officials as you ask for a legislative inquiry to be put in place. You're going to want to include everything that's here on this slide. I'm not going to read the whole slide for you, but I want to go to the very bottom to remind you of something very important in Texas. The question of whether audio and or video records are available of the allegations of abuse, neglect, financial exploitation. Texas has regulations that permit what is referred to as AEM, or authorized electronic monitoring, which includes the use of a audio and video capture in a person's room. And if they have a roommate, with the consent of that roommate to cover the entire room, or if you don't have consent from the roommate, to cover your section of the room under whatever type of video monitoring, audio monitoring that you deem appropriate. Now, you may end up needing to pay for the bandwidth to allow that to stream if you don't, for example, just simply rely on memory cards and going in periodically to take out the memory card, review it, and replace it with a fresh one. This is where surveillance technology like Ring and other such companies can come into play. Also, buying your own router if the facility can't or won't allow you to utilize Wi-Fi services or wired internet services for that AEM, again, that authorized electronic monitoring. That's the official right. There's another right, and that right is for you to go ahead and to own private surveillance technology. Because especially in nursing facilities where there are roommates, you're going to have privacy curtains. And a privacy curtain is almost always going to obscure your view of what's taking place behind it. And depending on how much noise is being made, your audio may or may not be as useful as you hope it to be. As a staff ombudsman, there were a number of occasions in which a clock, a pen, a stuffed animal, whatever it was that also contained within it private audio and video surveillance inside the curtain, was in fact what demonstrated abuse, neglect, usually abuse, by staff upon a resident. And appropriate action was taken, not just to protect the resident from further abuse by that staff, but the appropriate discharge of that staff from service, and when necessary, criminal charges being filed against that staff member for assaulting the person inside the curtain. I wish this was an uncommon occurrence, but this is a high turnover and extremely physically and emotionally demanding job, being a professional working in a nursing facility in particular. And ultimately, the worst that could happen is that if this private surveillance, unlike what's mounted on the wall and agreements have already been signed and before it's mounting and so forth, if the stuffed animal or the clock or the pen or whatever it is discovered, the worst that can happen, the facility has the right to demand its removal. That's it. It's not grounds for involuntary discharge. It's not grounds for any type of complaint against you or your loved one who has placed that surveillance there. Protect yourself. Trust but verify. Because ultimately this, as I said, is not just a high stress, physical and emotional stress position, but it is also, by virtue of being a high turnover position, one in which knowing the idiosyncrasies of a resident very often is lost because institutional history can't be maintained when too many people leave over the course of a year. So I'm not trying to scare anybody with this. There are times when nursing facilities are your best option, but you can't be there 24/7, at least in person. So authorized electronic monitoring is one part of this equation. And another important part of this is use private surveillance for when the curtain is drawn. Because in the end, if you suspect, whenever you visit or see on camera, the authorized camera, as well as the private surveillance, a change in the physical appearance and condition of your loved one, it's a good opportunity for you to go ahead and to raise those suspicions in the manner in which I demonstrated on the earlier slides, going to the various agencies, getting intake numbers, and then contacting your elected officials in order to ask that legislative inquiries be sent to said agencies to expedite the investigation process. Some resources to finish up today. I mentioned that I wanted to make sure that you had the contact information for that triad of agencies that every county and territory has. Harris County's Area Agency on Aging and its Aging and Disability Resource Center are listed here. You found on the earlier slide the contact information for the managing local ombudsman, Greg Shelley, as of the recording of this particular program uh, from Harris County's long-term care ombudsman program. So you have the triad through those slides. But there's also some additional pieces that are here. The National Consumer Voice is an incredible resource if you are considering or have a loved one who needs to be in or is already in a long-term care facility, but also understanding through not just cost of care surveys, pragmatically what you can expect in terms of financial outlay, but a couple of stories about how to approach appropriately the subject if it's not you who's in need, but rather an aging loved one who's in need. Um, the idea of whatever type of assistance that loved one may need, either in their home, the aging in place model, as a supplement, short or long term, to not necessarily independent living, but more assisted living, or if they need full blown nursing facility care. So I encourage you to use these as starting points from which to continue your own research. And I will remind you that Peggy and I do this every day in terms of either offering direct consultation or providing appropriate resources so that you can be indirectly supported by us in getting to the right contact in order to address the timely and appropriate need. So our contact information is, of course, going to be on the end of each of these slide decks. And if you go to our website, hhci.org, you can either click on the tab for HHCI CARES or simply click on the About Us tab, and you will find our contact information as well. For appointments, we encourage email so that we can schedule dedicated time for you, not just to introduce you to our services if that introduction is needed, but to also work on particular issues or areas of spiritual and emotional as well as pragmatic concern that you would like to address. I should go ahead and note here that while Peggy is not ordained clergy, she is also the recipient of an earned Master of Divinity and served for years as a hospital chaplain in the Memorial Hermann Healthcare System, where I have served as ordained clergy in congregational settings, hospital chaplaincy, hospice chaplaincy, and as I mentioned prior to coming to the Hope and Healing Center and Institute, as a staff ombudsman for Harris County's long-term care ombudsman program. Our bios are located on the About Us section if you'd like to reinforce any concerns you have about why should I come talk to you. I hope that this has been helpful in some way, and we encourage you to share freely, not just the materials that you'll be sent at the end of this series, but also our contact information, our website, and inviting people to click on the resource tabs themselves to see recordings of programs like Aging with Grace or any other program that is pertinent to a person's particular aging situation, mental health situation. The Hope and Healing Center and Institute champions mental health in terms of both being a service provider and a systems advocate. And we encourage you to make good use of any of the services that we offer under the umbrella of HHCI. I want to thank all of you for being here today, and I hope a brilliant week filled with moments of kindness and gentleness. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank all of you for being here, and you take care.